So without further ado, I'm going to ask Ger to present first, and then I can introduce Gary for the second presentation. So over to you, Ger. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Is that okay? Everybody see that? Okay, so I just want to begin by saying that the psychologically informed environment is, I suppose, when you go through it and when Gary and I are talking about it, you'll see that you're doing an awful lot of what a psychologically informed environment is already. So what a psychologically informed environment tries to do is acts as a framework to bring in all the good practices that we are currently using and to enhance and to develop other practices that we need to. In terms of housing first, P.I.E, or a psychologically informed environment, looks at the whole or the totality of the person, their past experiences, their present experiences, and wraps around services, around supports in order to help them to manage and deal with those things. So that's why it's excellent. So I suppose just at the get-go, to start off as to what informs our work and what led us into developing a psychologically informed environment is that some of the stuff I'm saying looks pretty obvious, but first one is that homelessness is wrong. The second thing is that homelessness does not define a person. So, it's a stage in a person's life. Somebody can leave homelessness and we support them to do that. We also bring into consideration the social contract that we have with the people that we share our society with. And the most fundamental part of that social contract is that we look after the most vulnerable people in our society. We also believe that homeless people deserve a quality service. So that's something that came out recently in research that was done in Trinity in a book by Dr. Owen Sullivan, which kind of highlighted the fact that in a lot of places in the sector that homeless people should be happy for whatever service they give. We believe that they deserve a quality service. I suppose another key and fundamental part of having a psychologically informed environment is that we believe that people have experienced persistent and ongoing trauma in their lives from a very young age, and this has a lasting cognitive and physical effects. We also understand that environment plays a key role in interventions. So just to expand on that a little, Robin Johnson, who I've worked with a bit at a psychologically informed environment, he was one of the instigators of P.I.E, and he worked as a psychiatric social worker, and he got to see a lot of visits and multi-agency visits. So he got to see people in different locations, and he questioned why people behave differently in one location. So say, for example, in an emergency accommodation as opposed to a community setting, where the only thing that changed was the environment and the person's behavior in response to the environment they were in. The other key thing is that people should not be blamed for their vulnerabilities. So in Ireland, and we've had a long history of the deserving and undeserving poor. We've had poor law, and a lot of our modern day policies has been affected by our historical approach to dealing with homelessness and to dealing with vulnerable people. And that, of course, the main thing is that compassion, understanding, patience, empathy are core values of our work. One of the key pillars of psychologically informed environment is evidence-based, or learning and inquiry. So what information is out there, what research is out there that can influence and form our approach to how we work with people who are experiencing homelessness. So one of the key things was, and this came about from research that Focus Ireland had done, that research that Cork Simon had done. And in that research, which was done independently by UCC and other researchers, they found that between 96 and 100% of the people using their service had experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experience. And because of the homeless crisis we have in Ireland at the moment, where over 3,500 children are homeless, that is becoming an adverse childhood experience for them as well. So they're traumatic events. I know a lot of people are probably aware of adverse childhood experiences. So adverse childhood experience has been designated as a public health issue. And you can see that, from the infographic that's there, that, levels of lung disease, levels of attempted suicide, levels of intravenous drug use, you're more prone to engage in that type of activity, the more adverse childhood experiences that you have. And you can see from the kind of the Maslow triangle that, it leads adverse childhood experiences, with the end one being an early death. And we know that these adverse childhood experiences, in our experience of working in homeless services, it has been the pathway for people entering into homeless services. So as I was saying, we were going in the research that had been done both in Cork and nationally and internationally, the figures were roughly around what's representative here. So you need 70% of children in foster care, and 93% of homeless mothers have a lifetime history of interpersonal trauma. So the numbers are reflected in the very high, 90s in terms of the effect that adverse childhood experiences have. Now, the thing about adverse childhood experiences is you can't focus on that solely, because the adverse childhood experiences that you experience as a child usually perpetrated by your parents. It doesn't take into consideration, or at least must take into consideration, the structural inequalities in society that created that environment to exist. So once you accept everything that I've said today, in the last number of slides, is what you do now. So you have all this information. You know that a way of working, you know that the effects that trauma has on people. So what do you do now? So what we decided to do was we would take on a psychologically informed environment. And this comes from P.I.E, which is something you should look at. So at its simplest, a psychologically informed environment has been described as one that takes into account the psychological makeup, the thinking, the emotions, the personalities, and the past experience of its participants, and in the way that it operates. So it looks at the total experience of the person. The other thing what P.I.E does as well is that the compassion and the empathy and the understanding and the patience that you show to your customers or to your service users, you also show that to your staff. So it's a universal. It's not just the customer you're dealing with. Everybody's involved in this, and all parts of the organization are involved in this. So as I was saying, it's a whole organizational model. In our respects, like that includes fundraising, finance, property, services. Everybody is part of delivering a psychologically informed environment. And that it can't be just done in one piece of the organization because it won't work. It needs to be everything. And P.I.E influences all areas of the organization. And that is a key part of that. So there's 5 principles. And I mean, my apologies for rushing through this, but we're kind of on a limited time, and we could spend, Gary and I, could spend the day talking about psychologically informed environment and how effective it is. So I'm just going to look at one, which is spaces of opportunity. I've kind of already touched on learning inquiry by talking about adverse childhood experiences and all the other research that's out there that enhances our knowledge, that makes our service a better service for the service users that come to use our service. So there's a psychological awareness and a psychological framework. So the psychological awareness is about how trauma affects it. And we've kind of slightly developed our psychologically informed environment by introducing trauma informed as a psychological framework for that. Training support for staff is obviously very important. And then the rules, roles, and responses, and the learning inquiry. But I'm just going to focus specifically on spaces for opportunity. I suppose spaces for opportunity can be, it's the physical space, and it's a thoughtful design with client input. So now when Focus Ireland is going and we're developing properties, we're developing that in mind. What can that do? What can the property that we're giving this person? That's very important for Housing First. What can we do to make this as impactful as possible? But the physical space is the foundation on which our relationship builds, on which the pathway out of homelessness is built. That's the anchor to this. The other thing is that in time, you need time to build relationships. The people that we're working with have a long history of homelessness, have a long history of trauma, and you need time to build that relationship of trust, that relationship of understanding. You must also recognize that any contact is a space for opportunity. Any contact, and you don't even need to apply this to Housing First. You can apply this to your own life, to any project, in any relationship you have, to recognize, and particularly in times of pandemic, that recognize that any space is an opportunity to enhance a person's life, to make them feel better about themselves, to make it worthwhile. It's positive human contact is key to that. Also, a space of opportunity is recognizing the incredible resilience and strength it takes to survive homelessness, or to be homeless, or to live on the street, and to recognize that as a strength. And I think another key thing is to validate the cognitive and physical effects of trauma. So and to realize also that the person's behavior is a way of communicating. So you're right to feel the way you feel because of the trauma that you've experienced, and that's okay. And I think it's important that we let people know that. So the next couple of slides is going to show you about how we kind of turned the physical environment around. So this is an area of Cork City where we would have originally have had our Focus Ireland office. It's down a back street. It's very close to an A&E department. It's also very close to an outpatients department. So there's a lot of sirens. There's a lot of, and as you can see, there's a lot of, now this area has become regenerated since these pictures were taken, but that's how it looked when we moved there. So there was a lot of stuff. And also as well, either side of it, it's a very narrow lane. And either side, the buildings are quite high, so it feels very enclosed. But we know that light and space are important for people who have experienced trauma. So basically what I'm saying, it wasn't a very inviting place to go to. And you can see from our office that we had, bars on the doors and stuff like that. And it was sending out a message that we did not want to send. So what we did was we moved the office. And also the thing about it is homeless people are always used to being on the margins of society. And where our offices were on the margins of the society in Cork City, we had to, do something about that. We had to rebel against that particular kind of notion that this is where homeless services should be. So we moved to the centre of Cork City, to the financial street in Cork City, the busiest street. It was an open, bright office. No bars in the door, straight in as normally as you would expect to engage in any sort of service. There's no barriers. Obviously, this is a pre-COVID picture because there's no screens there. But so light, the paint, everything about how you structure your environment is important, even down to the pictures on the wall. Everything. So this is just to enhance, to encourage people to engage in the service, to invite them in. That this is a peaceful, calm place where you can feel safe. So the office is open plan, so that's support for staff. And this is an interesting part here because this is the area where you can sit down, have a cup of tea and have a cup of coffee. The biscuits on the table are a vital part of this whole process as well. But also outside, you'll see that there's a garden, and the garden is very bright and it's light. And sometimes the sessions or one-to-one work needs to happen out there because of the space and the light that it gives, and people feel a little bit safer. So everything is taken into consideration. So this is the quality of an inside picture of one of the apartments we've had. Our founder, Sister Stanislaus Kennedy, would always say that you can't give broken people broken things. So we give them the best that we can provide in terms of the accommodation and the furnishing within that. And that's it. And we try to make it as homely as possible and give people a sense of pride in the place that they now have. To finish on saying that, the key thing is compassion and understanding and patience and kindness. And that, that's where you start with your P.I.E. P.I.E doesn't need to be a huge massive organizational change. We started it simply by doing reflective practice right across all the aspects of the organization. And we're slowly building it out like you throw a pebble into water and just concentric circles. That's how it's working for us. But the key thing to remember, what you must bring into your practice, in no matter where you are, whether it's Housing First or anything else, is that the antidote to trauma and the experiences that our service users have experienced is kindness, compassion, understanding, patience. They're the key elements. And I think that's me. Sorry for rushing through it, but I was stuck for time.